Yes, it should only record my face. All right, let's get started. So welcome everyone. My name is Arvin, and I want to start with a land acknowledgement. So I'm coming to you from Toronto, Ontario, Canada, and Toronto is in the Dish with One Spoon territory. The Dish with One Spoon is a treaty between the Anishinaabe, Mississaugas, and Haudenosaunee that bound them to share the territory and protect the land. Subsequent indigenous nations and peoples, Europeans, and all newcomers have been invited into this treaty in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. And I come to you from X University. So I would just want to briefly take a moment to acknowledge the recent news that the remains of 215 children were found at a residential school site in Canada. And this is relevant to this presentation now because I say that I'm from X University. It's the name that Indigenous students have been choosing to give the real name of my institution, which is Ryerson University, because it takes its namesake from one of the architects of Canada's residential schools. So I think that this is important to acknowledge and kind of contextualize ahead of discussing what we're all here to talk about today, which is the MOP social media website tool. So first, I'll be kind of going over what the needs of behavioral social media research are, what the tool itself is, and give some kind of example studies that we're doing or going to do using the tool. If there's time, give a small demonstration of the tool, and then have a Q&A. And again, all the slides and the recordings will be posted online to be freely accessible later. Okay, so I presume many of the people in this presentation are interested in social media or social media research. And I think one thing that perhaps all of us share is that we all in some way or another kind of want to see how we can make better online environments. So the way that we go about this a lot of the time is by doing kind of program evaluation or research on social media and looking at some very broad questions that encompass a lot of different hypotheses or lines of research. And I think two of the big ones for me have been how does different social media content affect people's behavior? So how does exposure to, say, misinformation, so sensitive content such as like violence or things that might be, triggering to some people, or even, positive content, how does that impact people's behavior, their attitudes, their beliefs, and whatnot? Another big question is kind of not the content itself, but the structure of social media websites. How do the different design elements of social media websites are conducive to different kinds of behaviors, whether that be information diffusing in different ways across social networks, or how we quantify the feedback that we give one another on social media platforms. Some of you may be aware of this documentary, The Social Dilemma, that came out with varying degrees of evidence-based claims. And I think when you look into or read about many of the issues about social media and kind of the harms that can come from it today, it really kind of puts things into perspective and makes you think, well, wow, we need to do something about this, right? So I have some quotes here. So this first quote is from Leah Pearlman, and she is kind of creator / co-creator of the like button on Facebook. And when interviewed about the impact of the like button, she said, well, you do know that episode of Black Mirror, that one where everyone is obsessed with likes. When I saw that, I suddenly felt terrified of becoming those people, as well as thinking I'd created that environment for everyone else. And the person who invented the retweet button for Twitter says the biggest problem is the quote retweet. Quote retweet allows for the dunk. It's a dunk mechanism, saying that people just kind of use it to dunk on and make fun of people without giving them an opportunity to defend themselves against the dunking in a kind of equally proportionate kind of way. And through reading more and more about the history of social media design, I got pretty doom and gloom about, well, what can be done about this? How do we persuade people to behave in a better manner? Should we persuade people to behave in a better manner? That might be more of like a ethical, philosophical question than empirical one. But sometimes I get in my feelings, and I'm like, we need to. I just stamp it down. We need to radically rethink the way we design interactions on social media to like incentivize better behavior, better interactions, better designs, to in some sort of outcome oriented way. But like, I think we should do that. And part of the reason why I think we should do that is because I don't think we have the proper tools to conduct the research and collect the data we need to substantiate these sorts of claims one way or another. And the tools that we do have been lagging behind social media platforms themselves. And the interesting thing is, while we do need this empiricism, social media platforms usually have good experimental behavioral data. They're constantly doing micro experiments on their users. They're doing little A/B tests that are really highly powered and like directly applicable to the environments that like we would want to research, as well as people who study social media. And we don't really. We have kind of roundabout ways or different methods that need to be complemented to study behavior on social media. So like we in surveys often present people with posts and say, okay, tell us what you would like. Would you like any of these posts, as opposed to measuring the behavior directly, because often API access is precarious, or you cannot completely manipulate all the content on social media and present it to people. Excuse me. The other thing is that there's a lot of use of a lot of observational data. So this would be like, scraping for tweets or using things like CrowdTangle, which are great, but you cannot control for selective exposure. So you don't really know what else people were presented alongside the posts of interest, which can alter how people might behave. It contextualizes it within like an actual social media environment, as opposed to just one post in isolation, which doesn't actually exist. And more important than all this is that we need to be very sure about what we're studying, because the few changes that we can make could affect how people communicate. And by people, I mean billions of people. So there's great responsibility associated with this. And in these supposed tools that we need, these tools need to do a lot of things simultaneously. They need to simulate the physical conditions, actual user interfaces of actual social media platforms. They need to simulate the psychological conditions, so that the user experience that user interface kind of elicits. Different things like the imagined audience, who people think will be seeing their posts, with the same heuristics or the mental shortcuts they make when they're interacting with these social media platforms. And the kind of the closer we are to that, the more likely we are to have behavior that's generalizable and we can do something about social media's design today. And if we had those tools, we could go and assess the past designs of social media and current designs as well. So I didn't even know this. Like, I don't know, maybe that speaks to my age, but like apparently Facebook used to have like a slider where you can adjust the kind of content that appears on your feed. Someone fact check me if I've been duped here, but that's interesting. Seems like a lot of people have been asking for ways to alter their algorithms, but this was removed. I don't know why. Maybe it just didn't incentivize or like allow social media to be monetized as well. Another thing, the ways that we interact themselves, not just the kind of content we're fed, they've changed over a while. Like 5 years ago, was it maybe 6 years ago, Twitter changed their favorite button to a like button because they felt that the heart was a more universal symbol. Is it? Do we have the data? I don't think so. Maybe Twitter does. And we need to be like responsive, because these designs are changing all the time. In the past year, we've seen Facebook add a 7th reaction button. We've seen Twitter try out these kind of prompts if you try to retweet something that you haven't read yet. And even as I was making this presentation, Instagram kind of reversed some of its decisions to hide like counts in certain regions, now giving people the option. So these physical and psychological conditions change, and research becomes kind of, the past research can become irrelevant kind of quickly. And we need to be responsive as researchers or people studying or interested in social media even. and we need to create future designs. I think the benefit of not being at a big social media platform and working there is that you, and perhaps I'm saying this more towards kind of academics and such like that, but there's the opportunity to actually design for public interest instead of private interests, and being able to encourage that and being able to give people accessible tools to do that, I think has great benefit, because then allows for people to make policy recommendations that are not actually at the platforms themselves. And so this is just like an idea I had for my postdoc. Let's see if I get funding. And the last thing is that the people who are doing the research need this software to be really easy to use, because like all the academics I know are like burnt out, right? Everyone is has 1,000 different responsibilities, and they need something that's quick, easy, and doesn't require them to learn a whole lot of skills. So earlier this year, we did a survey of researchers who are interested in using the tool, and we found that most of them had no coding experience. So it was important that not only does the tool good for researchers, and not only good for participants, but researchers as well. So a few years ago, we built a prototype tool. Well, I should say like a year ago. And we thought, this is our mock social media website. It will be a tool that people can manipulate the content of, people could interact with it in a naturalistic way. And we thought it was pretty good for that time, but it was so apparent that you could do so much more with this tool and make it even closer to real social media. And that's what we did. So onto the meat of things. This is the mock social media website tool. And what it does is it addresses these needs, in my opinion. It collects comprehensive experimental and behavioral data on how participants interact with social media. It simulates existing like natural user interfaces and experiences of actual social media platforms. So that's the physical and the psychological. And I think the key to designing this tool and the way we structured it is that it's highly modular, and you'll see what that means in a second, and highly accessible. And everything in this tool is kind of coded in a way to be easily modified, replaced, or added to later, which I think is key to long-term support and some of those things like responsiveness and usefulness of this tool later. And because of these things, in my opinion, again, fact check me if I'm wrong, I think that it allows us to answer questions that we couldn't before, and like answer existing questions in a more comprehensive kind of way. And the cool thing about this tool is that it can be deployed offline or online, which means that like once you have the code, if you just want to set this up on a lab computer or perhaps somewhere out in the field, you can do that, and you can have it run completely locally. The data never goes to the internet anywhere. And we tried setting this up, and it took under 2 hours for someone who has little code, like zero coding experience, to set up from front to back, which I think is like pretty impressive for a tool that isn't like, part of a huge service somewhere. And you can also deploy it online, which I imagine a lot of people would want to do who are conducting research in online samples, particularly in times like in pandemic times. All you really need is a domain name. So we just recently bought Study Social Media, and hook it up to some sort of database. So most of the documentation for this tool will focus on Amazon, because it's what was easy for us and will work for us, but it's like database or like server agnostic. And our lead web developer, Gurkaran, assures me that deploying it online is even easier than deploying it locally. I'm not sticking to that claim yet because I don't want to get sued, but I think that gives me hope that people aren't scared by the idea that like, oh no, I need a domain name. Oh no, I need like a server. Like, we plan to give step by step on how to do this and get it up and running. And so I think now we'll kind of talk about like, how is the tool structured? How does this work exactly? And so once you've deployed the tool, which is essentially like you've got it up and running either on your computer or like it's live on a website somewhere, you can configure it to have as many kind of researcher or like administrator accounts as you want. And everything that's within a researcher's account is completely contained within that researcher. That means the other researchers cannot see that data, which means you could set this up once for like a lab, but you could set this up once for like an institution or an organization, and you're good. And you can just add as many administrators as you want, which is like a simple change in the code, and everything's independent. Then within each individual researcher, there can be multiple kind of access code. And you can think about like an access code as like a unique link. So if some of you have tried like the demonstration version of this study, it had like kind of like a number at the end of it. There's like the URL and there's a number. And each access code can link to one condition or randomly assign people to multiple conditions. And so it's kind of like a landing page, and then based on like that landing page, you'll put a unique participant ID in there, which is like allows you to determine that they're unique responses. And then each access code can have pretty much as many conditions as you want. And the condition is kind of like that next building block of the study, which is comprised of different pages. So I'll get into this now. What makes up a condition? In the tool, when you go into the back end, hopefully I'll get time to do a demonstration of this later, you create essentially a flow of pages. And each of these pages kind of renders something different. Now you're here because it creates a social media timeline that's probably interesting, like what interests you in this tool. But it can also do a lot of other things which are helpful for someone who wants to conduct research, including a registration page where users can upload the kind of information you specify, such as like commonly a profile photo and like a username. But again, because this is a modular system, we can expand this later. Say we add profile pages later, they can upload like a header image, all that kind of stuff, right? It will all be defined through this kind of a registration page. Then there's information pages. So this is like custom text that you can input. But also information pages can do so much else. They can generate completion codes for like mTurk or Prolific, or if you're recruiting online somewhere. They can function as consent forms as well. You can collect multiple choice responses using the tool. You can collect open text responses as like essay style responses as well on their own dedicated kind of pages. And you define what pages you want and what sequence you want them in to build your study. So this is like a pseudo study builder as well as kind of like a social media simulation tool. So maybe you only need the bare bones. You want to give them some instructions, get them to register so that their usernames and profiles show up on like the timeline. And then you get, that's it, that's all you want. Or maybe you just want to embed this within Qualtrics, which by the way, you can do anything that accepts custom HTML, whether that be your lab website, your a Qualtrics page where you might have other kind of survey stuff that you want to go alongside this. You can just have the social media page and that's it. You can also randomize the presentation of pages if you want to control for like order effects or something like that. We've tried to think of things from like a researcher perspective because we try to do research too. And again, this is where kind of the modularity comes in as well. We can add more page types later. So we've kind of thought prospectively about this because people might feel that they have better ideas for pages than us because this is open source. So they can add them. Or if we get a lot of feedback from the community, we can add them. There's so much flexibility here. And then there's like the meat of the meat, I would say, which is the social media pages themselves. So many of you probably either watched the video or seen the demonstration, and the key to it all is like kind of that simulated social media page, which you can define everything on. And what do I mean by everything? I mean the posts on. You can say, what is each post? When was it posted? What type of post is it? Is it a photo post? Is it a video post? Well, what does the text say? Who is the author associated with it? Is the author verified or not? What's the author's profile photo? And then you can upload the media associated with it. So that would be the profile photos of the pictures, any videos you would like that are associated with images or photos videos that are associated with posts or images that are associated with posts. And you can also upload language information. I think this is like a key, very interesting part of the tool is that any single piece of text that participants see, you can modify in a spreadsheet and upload, and you can just change what you want one thing to say to something else, and it will be reflected. And it's all through pretty much an uploadable spreadsheet. And the benefit of doing this is that you can run a study in different languages, or languages that we didn't even intend that the studies could be ran in. What else? The platforms themselves. So for the June 21st release, we're going to have the ability to simulate Facebook and the ability to simulate Twitter as well. And another thing that we thought about is like replicability. So if people want to test a certain kind of content on Facebook, but like, oh no, we changed our mind, our study is actually going to focus on Twitter instead, like the same input data will basically need like minimal modifications, if any, and work across platforms. Because everything in the kind of upload, everything that you define for the tool is meant to be universal and not need to be changed later, despite it being so modular and being able to add other things to the study at a later point. And so these things, the posts and the author information associated with the post and the language information, it's simply a spreadsheet that gets uploaded in the back end, takes a minute, like a second to save, it's done. And I think one of the most interesting things for me is that we've left open the possibility of adding platforms at a later date, or updating the current platforms that we have right now. Again, using like very similar like upload data structures so that we can keep up with the changes made to existing social media platforms. And my hope is that over time and given funding, add as many different simulated social media platforms as we can. That includes Instagram, TikTok, Reddit. But right now it's only Facebook and Twitter, because we want to like test everything very thoroughly, because we don't want any bugs while you're running your 1,000-person study. And one very interesting thing that we've added, and this is kind of particular for a study that we were running, but I think could be useful for other people as well, other kinds of research questions as well, is what we call the misinformation display. So after participants interact with like a social media page, they can kind of create like an info page afterwards and like check something off, which will notify participants of if they interacted with misinformation. So basically when you upload your posts, you like kind of tick off, is this misinformation or not? Like a 0 or 1 kind of thing next to each post. And then if they interact with a misinformation post, so it has like a 1 in its like is misinformation column, it will dynamically on a per participant basis show them that they interacted with it afterwards. This is important to us studying misinformation, because like mere exposure to misinformation can actually enhance belief, so that because we're exposing them to misinformation, we felt like kind of a responsibility to try to like debunk it and also use this as like a learning tool. But it doesn't have to be misinformation. You can give whatever kind of like introductory text that you want and tell them like, this is what you liked that's relevant to this category. This is what you shared, which was relevant to this category, and so on. And let's see here. And the other thing, in addition to modularity, is accessibility was very important to us, because, you know, I'm pretty sure many of us have seen those stories of like, you know, AI doesn't recognize a Black person, or like this only works for white people, or something like that, like systemic bias in the tools that are built and then applied at large. So looking at kind of the landscape of technology, it was important that we create tools that do not perpetuate inequalities in who gets studies and research, whose life experiences are accounted for in the resulting data, and who are accommodated by the policies which are then like built off of the data. So there are a few basic things that we did, which are like, it meets web content accessibility guidelines. That means people of different accessibility needs can interact with the website using any device that they have, although I'm not sure if like a smart watch will work, probably not. We can change the wording or language via the spreadsheet, and we've included English, French, simplified Chinese, Tagalog, and Punjabi. But again, you just add a new column, translate the words that you want to translate, it works in your language. Even if you think my language is poor when I made the default English wording, you can fix that and just add a new column that's your custom English and put it in there. Again, like working on any device is also very important, because mobile access is far more common in like developing nations. So if you're wondering, you know, if you're wondering why social media companies care so much about accessibility all of a sudden is because like the next 100 million or billion users are expected to come online in Africa. And so ensuring support for mobile devices is very important, generally speaking. And I encourage you to take advantage of these features. We also have one really cool, unique feature, which is if you get participants to register for your like mock social media study, you can toggle off the actual collection of like profile photos and usernames. So what that allows you to do is they can go in and they click, upload username, they upload their profile photo, but it doesn't get like saved anywhere. Like it never transmits to your database. So that allows them to kind of proceed through the study in a natural way, but like allows you to circumvent kind of the ethical concerns of collecting identifying information if like you're not interested in that and they don't consent to it. And another thing that we're working on is, well, first of all, this is open source, which also is a big accessibility thing. But also the documentation for this tool, once it's in kind of like a really good, robust state, I'm going to work on automatically translating the documentation into other languages so that researchers of different languages who want to use the tool can have like at least like a semi-native version of the documentation, the instructions and guides on how to use the tool. But if you're a non-native English speaker, please reach out and let me know, because I'm pretty sure I can only translate it to so many languages. Okay, and then the data. So social media interactions pretty much all get output. So all the posts that they make, if they like share a post and add a comment, or if they just share a post, if they attach media, so they post and they like attach a selfie, all collected. Posts that they like, share, reply to, commented on, like click the links of, all collected. Whatever they wrote in their open text responses, multiple choice, all this kind of stuff is available and output to a spreadsheet, as well as in JSON format. So for those who are unfamiliar, JSON is basically like a very, very, let's say like a dense format of data that is very nested. So it's not as easily analyzed. And truthfully, most of the data that you might want for most questions would be available in the CSV. But if you're like really into like, what is the exact single second that they like something relative to the time that they started, then the JSON is for you. And here's like kind of an example of what the data will look like. So these little numbers inside of each column are just like the IDs of posts. So you give each post like a unique number ID, and if they like or comment into it, it gets added to a string in the data. So you know exactly the post they liked, and then you can analyze this how you should wish. And I just want to like briefly go over the different, like, what are we doing with this, like this tool that we've developed? What can you do with this tool that you've developed? And I want to talk about two studies very briefly. The first one is a study that we did using the tool, and actually data collection is currently ongoing. And it's looking at like how susceptible immigrants and refugees in Canada, specifically Ontario, are to misinformation. So we're getting 125 like people who speak English, Chinese, Tagalog, and Punjabi as their first language in Canada, and giving them a whole bunch of regular innocuous news, what's the word? Innocuous news and misinformation, and seeing like what are the rates of like interacting with misinformation in these various communities, so that we can then go a step further later and develop some sort of misinformation intervention that is particular to the kinds of misinformation that those communities are vulnerable to. And if you're curious, like this is what the makeup of that study looks like in our little condition page sequence structure. So each language has like an identical version of like its own separate condition, which starts with some instructions. People register for the social media website, they interact with social media website. We give them some measures afterwards, like, like COVID knowledge, how confident are they that they can detect deception. Give them some open text questions afterwards. Do you have any comments about the social media website? So we help validate the tool in the process. And then they're kind of linked offsite to another page where they get compensated. And another study that I'm hoping to continue doing is for my dissertation, which is looking at like user reputation systems. So essentially, if I'm wondering if we can change the design of social media to kind of like disincentivize on a structural level interactions with misinformation and kind of encourage people to be more attentive, skeptical, uncertain before they make that shared decision and be geared towards accuracy. One way I thought about potentially doing this is by leveraging identity processes, which are very powerful and are increasingly a topic of study in my discipline, which is psychology, because people always want to keep like a positive social identity. They want to look good no matter what, because it carries like social benefits with it. And people have control over how they express their identity, and hoping that like you can use this to kind of create some friction between people and information. And so the idea I had is that, well, how about we come up with like a user reputation system? So this is like the most extreme example of leveraging people's identity to get them to not like interact with misinformation on a whim and be more effortful about it. So the idea here is we would give them a score based upon the percentage of kind of true information they liked or shared out of like the total. So that would include the misinformation as well. And they'd get different badges on their profiles at different tiers to show how trustworthy they are. And the idea here is that like the threat of getting like a poor rating would motivate people to engage in better like media literacy behaviors. And hopefully like as a downstream consequence, like the whole user base would use these trustworthiness cues to hold each other accountable. And I tested this using the prototype of the mock social media website tool, where I had kind of like a navigation bar, and so next to their profiles, people had a score and a badge associated with that score. And so it used as I kind of work towards a replication of this study, which will be using this tool, I will be structuring this in using the tool and using the kind of affordances that it offers. So there'll be a control condition, which kind of starts with instructions, then has like a registration. Then I will create a custom social media platform, because that's part of my cover story, is that you guys are trying this new hot social media platform that just came out, but you don't know about it yet. And we want you to use it. And then there's like a distractor task, and then they interact with another social media timeline, because you can have as many as you would like in one condition, and then have like kind of some debriefing information at the end. But in the experimental condition, which would be its own URL, I would start by giving them instructions, but also introduce them to this new like reputation system. They register as normal, but then they would interact with a timeline, and then they would get like an updated reputation score that's like dynamically based on their behavior. And then we tell them to interact again to see if like it scared them enough that they ended up with a poor reputation, so they now they want to do better, or it doesn't, which is what we found in the first study. But now using this tool and being able to kind of structure it more dynamically, and it being more aesthetically pleasing and interactive and accessible, I'm hoping that we might see some actual effects of the study. And I think the beauty of this tool and its modularity is that there is so many different questions that can be answered using it. So like, imagine, how do people respond to different posts? You could have two conditions that give people different sets of posts in each condition. That's a very basic one. Another question is, how do responses to the same post differ across platforms? You could create two different conditions, but they show the exact same information, which again is possible because that kind of shared upload data structure. But one's in Facebook UI, one's in Twitter UI. Another thing that you could do, if you want to do kind of like longitudinal analyses or like within designs, within person designs, you could have a different condition for each time point. So you send them a different link at each time point and show them the same post, different posts, whatever you would like. That's like I've been talking like a marathon right now. So hopefully the pacing has been all right for you guys. I haven't checked the chat because I feel like I've been.
Arvin, if you want, we can shift into answering a couple questions. There's lots.
Do we have a lot of questions?
Yep.
Okay.
Kirk can answer a couple, but if you want, I can flag the ones that are at the top of the list. So one of the questions was, say a participant has interacted with misinformation. Can you choose whether you want the information to show up and when?
Yes, it's a toggle, and it's like you create a page and then you're like, do you want a display to show up? And the default's no. But if you say yes, then it's just there. And you can like specify whatever instructions you want at the top, or like the text that you want to introduce the display. It's fully customizable, but yeah, it doesn't have to be there if you don't want it to.
And one of the questions, I'm sorry, Alex, I missed your question. Are you able to manipulate the number of likes and comments on a post?
Yes. So the pre-existing amount of likes or comments on a post, yes, you can. In our demonstrations and our studies, we tend to like just use 0 because, you know, we don't want to bias people or look at that in particular. But if you are looking at that in particular, you fully can.
Okay, so the next question, it might help if you can scroll to it in the chat. The other one is about, can people interact, and what about private messenger? Like, so could different participants interact, or can we simulate private interaction? This is a question that I'm really interested, or have always been interested in as well.
No, they cannot. So everyone's like experience is kind of like contained and simulated for just for them. So everything's like tightly controlled. There's no like cross participant interaction. Like if one person posts on their like simulated timeline, it doesn't show up on someone else's. That functionality is not there. We thought about it, but I think it would take a lot more and be like a very different tool. I know some people are working on this sort of thing. So if I can remember, I can perhaps forward you information. But yeah, no.
Another question has to do with ethics, which is very relevant. So ethics committees may want detail about the type of data gathered, especially when participants have autonomy in adding specific types of information like photos, media share, personal details when it's stored. So once people start using this, if some examples of ethics applications can be shared, that would be really helpful.
Yes, actually, sorry, is that the end? Yeah, so it's if you go to the documentation website, there should be already links to ethics materials, like de-anonymized ethics materials that we have used. And again, with respect to very private information, like photos and usernames, and like theoretically, you can get them to specify emails and passwords if you wanted as well. That functionality is in there. You could do that, and you can also toggle the actual collection of it off, so it just happens locally for them. And they think that you've collected that data, but you haven't. But yeah, we already have example ethics materials like a consent form, a debriefing form, some measures, and we'll have templates of the files that you upload, so like the spreadsheets. And the documentation website will also detail every single kind of data type that is collected at some point. And there'll be example output there perhaps at some point too, which will show you exactly what gets output from the website. Hope that helps.
Great question. You kind of already answered this, but does this platform account for existing relationships among social media users? So for example, if you're interested in assessing the implications of social comparisons with a close friend versus a stranger.
Not unless you had highly customized stimuli to that participant, like you made like a condition for each participant. I don't know that you would, there's no like API or functionality to pull in information from people's like existing social media relationships, if that's what you're asking. Yeah, no, I think is the answer, if I understood your question correctly, but you can clarify if not.
You're going to really like this question, Arvin. Can you link this to a video game or other outside software for participants to utilize?
So link this to a video game. I don't know, maybe clarify. I like video games, but I don't know what you mean. Is this Trent? Trent, I don't know what you mean.
No, this is Hannah. Hannah, are you okay for me to mute you, or would you prefer to maybe, I'll give you the option if you wanted to clarify.
I actually don't think that was my question. I was the one asking about
longitudinal. I'm sorry, you're right. It's because it keeps moving on me. You're right. It was Trent. I apologize. Hannah, I'll get to your question right after this one.
Okay, sounds good.
Sorry about that.
No problem.
Sorry, Hannah. Yeah, I don't know if you could link it. Essentially, if you deployed the website online, it has a URL. So like if your video game had like an in-game browser or something like that. I'm trying to like imagine like they have those browsers built into like VR games, so like or VR software. You could like open it up there and it should work fine because it
Can you
just
hear me?
simulates. Oh yeah.
So, as a social psychologist, I was kind of thinking like similar to, I don't know if you're familiar with ostracism research with like cyberball, where it's a very simple kind of software, but just in terms of linking to something where participants think that they're playing with others via this platform, but are actually just playing against the computer, but they think that they're playing against others, and this kind of feeds into that reality of, oh, there's people all over the world that you're interacting with.
Yeah. So I think that was part of the intention behind kind of simulating the social media feed and giving them names and setting up the cover story in like the information pages beforehand. Because for my dissertation research, like I told them like, okay, we got like a whole new social media platform that we're making, and there's a very elaborate cover story. We told them that like, you're a part of one of X number of universities that are piloting this. We already have this many users, and we had some advanced functionality in there too, which is not in this tool, but like a display saying that like how many users are online right now that are beta testing this platform. So I think some of that stuff is better relegated to like the information pages beyond what you can do in terms of making realistic usernames, realistic posts that might actually reflect kind of the target groups, what the target group might see in their actual social media use.
Mm-hmm.
Does this better answer your question?
Well, I was just wondering if like we could embed something like that into the platform to where it'd be a link within the platform itself, or if it'd have to be separate, like as a completely different link or what have you.
Yeah, I think due to like security reasons, I think like we've disabled kind of embedding any sort of like HTML or anything like that into the website. But theoretically, if you take the open source code and you add like your own type of HTML page that embeds like a cyberball game or like one of those Qualtrics games or something like that, you could run it like that. Additionally, you could embed this whole thing in like Qualtrics or another website and have it sequence between other different ways of interacting with others. Although there's nothing that directly links like the data outside of the platform for like, from what I understand, security reasons. So
wonderful. Thank you so much for all of this.
Yeah. Thank you for being interested in showing up.
Okay, these are great questions. So I'll jump back to Hannah. Hannah, I'm sorry that I jumped over your question before there. So Hannah's question is, can the tool be used for a longitudinal study, so over several days or weeks? And are there plans to add mouse tracking or scroll depth?
Yeah, so if you go to the kind of like future development page, which is in the documentation, I'll just kind of skip through this. So there is sort of like a long-term plan right now. To be fully honest, we've like frozen development to make sure that like we get this out nice and there's like no bugs or anything like that, which could be catastrophic if you run a study online. But something we heard a lot from the researcher feedback from the survey we put out earlier this year has been mouse tracking. Some people wanted video recording or like audio recording as well, which we have not implemented in there yet because I think it might have some more like data ramifications that need to be sussed out. Like it's quite an expansive kind of thing that you'd add. A longitudinal study you could do in two different ways. One is like having a different condition link for a different time period. On our list of things to develop has been on the future development page is to have like one link that you can return to at different times and see a different like sequence of pages. But that's not in like the June 21st version of the tool. And like our priorities might change once this is out, but we hear you. Thanks, Hannah.
Great, thanks, Arvin. Another question was, is it possible to somehow manipulate the size and or composition of one's audience? So, or the amount of traffic going on the platforms to give participants a sense of their reputation and on the spot when sharing or liking something?
I can think of a few ways to do that. One is you can vary the number of posts that you display to participants. So you can have like just more posts. So it looks like there's more going on and they're not like subject to like, we're like so obviously being exposed to just a few bits of information. Another way that you can do that is you can alter the time at which things have been posted. So each post like time, which as far as I remember is just like a text field. So you could put in like a proper date in there. So you can say like this was posted June 10th, 2021, or you could say like 6 seconds ago. You could say 10 seconds ago, and that's exactly what will render as like the date posted. That's what I can think of right now. I hope that helps or clarifies things.
Yeah, thanks, Arvin. A good clarifying question from Gavin is following up on customizing the number of likes and comments. Is it possible to add or customize comments below the post? So rather than just changing the reported number of comments on the post itself.
Yes, it is possible. So in that same like post spreadsheet that you upload, you can, there's kind of like an is column, is comment column, which you specify if something is a comment or not. And then if it is a comment, you like put the post ID of like the post that is its parent. So there's like a parent and like the child is a comment to it. So then when it renders, it will look through the data and be like, this is the parent and this is the child. So then it renders like that as the post, the main post, and then the child's as like the comments. And they don't have all the same kind of features as the posts on Facebook, but on Twitter, there'll be more flexibility in terms of like, because on Twitter, things are like comments are just other posts. So they have all the different features that a post can have. So they'll differ across platforms, but yes, you can do that. Okay, great. And then I have a question from Alexandra. Is there a way to set which accounts posts are seen at the top of the participant's news feed? So for example, on Instagram, an account might be automatically put at the top of the feed if a person tends to like their posts. Yes, so when you upload your post spreadsheet, you can tell the website what order you want the post to be presented in. So if the spreadsheet has them in a particular order, you can just go like order ascending or whatever, and it will show up in that exact order. Or you can like randomize it, which is what we did, but you don't have to have it random. You can have it in a predefined order. Okay, great. Is there an option for expanding the information for each profile that posts something on the feed? So for example, can participants click on the profile from a specific post and then open up to see the profile and decide to engage more with that profile's previous posts? Or can we record the amount of time that they spend on that profile? All of these things are things I want to do. So if you look at the future development section, I kind of explain how we want to do that and how we might go about doing that, which would be like a major kind of update. But right now you cannot. But that's like the next big thing for me is to create like profile functionality. How long do they spend on profiles? How many followers do those people have? Who exactly are the followers? Like define like the whole kit and caboodle, but not right now. Yes. Okay, and then there was, sorry, it's moving on me. Okay, so when you embed the simulator on Qualtrics, do you still need an SQL server like AWS, or can you link it to the Qualtrics database? My immediate response, because I don't know enough about the Qualtrics database, is that you will need the SQL server because it's not like integrated as a part of Qualtrics. What Qualtrics is doing is actually rendering another website inside of your Qualtrics page. So effectively, that whole website needs to be working on its own. So it would be very complex to actually integrate into the Qualtrics database. And I think we tried to look for information on that, but I don't know if Qualtrics has an API for saving to their database, but I may be wrong. But right now you can't do that. Okay, and then we had, maybe I missed this, but can the tweets or Facebook posts lead to external or hosted locally sites like news sites so that one can measure how long they stay there? Or do we simply know whether people intend to click a link? First of all, I want to say great question. I'm trying to like burn through these as fast as possible, but these are all great questions. You only know whether they clicked a link or not. You don't know the amount of time that they spent offsite. I know that can be measured. I know there's a way that can be measured because websites do it all the time, but that's not part of the tool at this time. But yeah, the links all work on the website. Okay, thank you. And then there was, I apologize, I thought I read this question, but maybe I only read it in my head. So Arvin, if you remember this, maybe just quickly answer it again. Is it possible to somehow manipulate the size and or composition of one's audience
or the amount of traffic going on the platform, so you can give participants a sense of their reputation when sharing or liking.
I think I did end up answering this, which is basically varying the number of posts or when they were posted to kind of simulate the idea that a lot of stuff is happening on the platform, or there's a lot of stuff on the platform. Very technical language I'm using here, but that's that's basically what I think.
Can videos play within the timeline?
Yes, videos play within the timeline. They have to manually start playing them, I think. But when they have started playing, if they scroll like away, like the videos auto pause like they would on any social media website.
Okay, so I'm aware of the time. We have about 4 minutes left. So
Yeah.
Arvin, I'll let you wrap up. If you have any other questions, please don't hesitate to contact us at any time. And Arvin can also create like a form, or you can tweet or email us at any time with any of your questions. So Arvin, I'll pass it over to you with any closing remarks.
Thank you guys so much for your interest and questions. You're really giving my vocal cords like a workout here, but I really, really appreciate it. So yeah, so I think I briefly skipped through some stuff here. You know, but before June 21st, so why did I say June 24th first instead of like releasing it immediately? Is because we want to get some essential documentation in there first. So like really detailed guides, like someone who's never touched a computer before, on how to get it up and running locally and online. And my hope is video guides later. We're still working on the Twitter platform, which is why we haven't shown it to you yet, but we want it to be just right. Template content to upload. So all those spreadsheets I'm talking about, I'm going to upload like template versions of that where you can delete the content and just write what you want in your posts. And template analysis code. So like I'm going to be analyzing this data anyway in R, and I think probably R is the best way to go. I'm not sure if you could do the things you need to do in SPSS syntax. But I'll have analysis code there too. That's like boilerplate. You can copy it, you can paste it. The code will come out on the 21st. It'll be open source. I don't know what the license is yet, but you can use it for free. Trust me. And after June 21st, like based on the feedback we get from people who are like using it, we're going to tweak things because there's no way we could test it the way that like so many researchers having access to it will be able to. Hopefully work on video guides, ways to make like deploying the website even easier. So potentially using our domain name, although I haven't figured out the logistics of this yet. Finish my dissertation, maybe on the less important side of things. And I really want you guys to reach out to me and let me know if you're using the tool, if you guys are working on a project. We have a dedicated page on the documentation website. I highly, highly encourage people to look through the documentation website, even though it's not like done right now. If you open source it, you have coding experience and you make your modifications, share them so that everyone can make use of them. I think that's the spirit of it being open source, that the work can go on, the support can go on, and it doesn't have to rely on, you know, just the original project team. But if you do share with us how what it's like using the tool and the projects you're working on, even if they don't have a name yet, I think that helps us communicate to funders and other bodies that this tool is valuable and people are actually using it. So we'll feature that you have a study in progress on the research page, and that could potentially help us, you know, fund more development of this project and be responsive in the way that I kind of suggested that this tool is capable of, but we need the resources. I want to thank the small army of people that this tool took to get here. You heard from Becky. I'm sure John is in the audience, Carson's perhaps in the audience, Gurkern, our masterful developer, Shirk, and Canadian Heritage, who quite generously funded this project. It's a social and political psychology lab, which I and Becky are a member of. Democratic Engagement Exchange, which John leads. Isabella Lam, our fantastic research assistant, and also these other fantastic research assistants. I was going to do a demonstration, but you can go yourself to this URL and put in any 6-digit number as a participant ID, and it should like work. I think when I put out the Twitter thread, I forgot to put this critical information that you need to put a 6-digit number as a participant ID for it to work. And you can do that. And it looks like everyone had questions already, but I know we're just coming to the end of this this webinar now. I'm so grateful that everyone was able to attend. I'm extremely excited for other people to get their hands on it and do good research. That also makes me like nervous as well, because I've never like put something like this out there into the world. But if you ever have any questions, feedback, anything like that, I just reach out to me via Twitter or via email. The slides will be posted online. Check out the documentation website. And that is the end. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.